Hello friends, welcome Dee Dee. Welcome to those who are joining. Welcome Yankee. Still giving it a minute or two for people to come in. If you feel comfortable doing so, say hello in the chat. Alright, welcome Dog. Welcome Madeline. Welcome Jayantha. Welcome Michelle. Hello Jay, welcome. Okay, I think we'll get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Welcome, Alice. All right, friends. So usually my talks are directly connected with the practice and the Noble Eightfold Path and things like that. And while the title might seem that it's not, it actually is. And this is something I've actually never given a talk on this before, but it is something that those of you who've heard me over the years, you've heard me talk a little bit about this here and there. But this is the title here is The Importance of Preserving the Pali Language. And, those of you Westerners or Buddhist converts, they might come, they listen to a Dhamma talk and they hear all these weird words and they're like, well, why do we have to hear this? What's going what about in my language? Right? And this is why actually I'm speaking in English, right? So that those who understand can hear. But really what we have to do is we have to go all the way back to the beginning, to when the Buddha was around. Right? The Buddha has told us that sabbe sankhara anicca, all conditioned things are impermanent. That includes knowledge of the Dhamma. The Buddha tells us quite clearly that the job description of a Buddha is when the Dhamma has been completely forgotten, another Buddha arises and finds the Dhamma. The Dhamma is always there. Right? Everything is always anicca. Everything is always dukkha. Everything is always anatta. But the knowledge of this is forgotten. And so another Buddha arises to find this and proclaim it. Oh, welcome. Oh boy, we just had a bunch of people join. Welcome Alice and Sean, Dharma Learner, Maria, Richard, Janaki, Bhumika, welcome. And so, from the very beginning, the Buddha knew that eventually people wouldn't even remember his name. People wouldn't remember sabbe sankhara anicca. Right? When you fully understand anicca, you know that this is, of course, very certain. And the Buddha even in the sutta speaks about how, depending on the certain actions that different Buddhas took, the memory of the Dhamma lasted shorter or longer. And so Buddha Gautama, the Buddha of our era, tried to do the best that he could to ensure that the teachings would live as long as possible. This is why he set up the Fourfold Assembly. Maybe you've heard of this. Right? The Fourfold Assembly are women and men monastics, and women people. Why did he set this up? This is the beginning of the religion. This is the beginning of the vessel that keeps the teaching alive into the future. But he also said this in the suttas. My bhikkhus are very learned, very practiced. They know the Dhamma very well. My bhikkhunis are very learned, very practiced. They know the Dhamma very well. They are learned. They know the Dhamma very well. My laymen are learned, practiced. They know the Dhamma very well. And so that we kind of have this thought today that, like, monastics are the ones who do all these things and the lay people do this. But in the suttas, the Buddha's like, no. The man or woman, learned, practiced, know the Dhamma very well. And why? Of course, if you were trying to set up something that was going to last a long time, that's what you would want. That's the ideal. All four corners of the Fourfold Assembly need to be learned, practice the Dhamma very well. And so the Buddha set up this community and did the best that he could in the 40 years that he was around to make sure that they were all learned, practiced very well. And then when he had his final extinguishment, well, the rest was up to the men and women back then, the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis and the laymen and women. It was up to them. The Buddha's gone, but the teaching is still here. We still know it. We can still practice it. So let us do the best that we can to preserve it, to keep it alive, so that as long as possible, so future generations can understand the teaching, can practice the teaching, and be very learned, very practiced. And so the first, welcome Michelle and Gregory, the first vessel of passing along the teachings were the people. The society, time, the general society, did not have writing. Very recently, writing was something. I thought the bar is pretty low. I don't know if that actually. Right. So, most of the history of writing, it was only for like government officials to keep track of how many bushels of grain, like that. So, for the average person, please tell me if what I'm seeing is only on my end. Tell me in the chat if you have any connection problems or cutting out. So you have the people power back then. And even at the time of the Buddha, there were already areas and different groups of monks who heard and memorized. Gregory says it is cutting out. So just if there's an extended cutting out or I'm basically unintelligible, just tell me. If there's, what you call it, Wi-Fi is sabbe sankhara anicca. It is unstable and undependable, just like everything else in conditioned existence. All right. At the time of the Buddha, even already there were groups of monks who were specialized in memorizing. It wasn't quite codified like this just yet. This group here, Nikaya, word for word, and this group knows the Samyutta Nikaya, word for word. Right? So there was already this ability to keep the teachings alive using brain power, right? Memorization. And Gregory says, Ethernet is less subject to anicca. That's true. But at the monastery, things are not always as easy as that. Anyway. So, back when we had oral tradition, tried to keep the teachings alive, we think today, because our memory's so bad, because we have to remember so many things, we think, oh, of course, people forgot things and things were all bad and nobody remembered. It wasn't until things were written down, you can't trust anything. And actually, my major in college was anthropology, track archaeology. And as somebody who has studied these things, I can tell you that that is utterly false. Both oral and written tradition have about the same level of error rate. And so this is the first thing to understand that is important. Just because something is oral tradition doesn't mean yes. As a matter of fact, what's easier to change? Somebody else's memory or a page in front of you where you can just write whatever you want? It was much easier to change. So this is the beginning. This is how we kept things alive for a long time. You can see this ethos today, even in modern monasticism, right? And the monks from a very young age, they are become very scholarly in Pāli and all of the suttas and all the things, Abhidhamma, etc. Even they have to, they won't like do a patimokkha unless they always there's somebody who knows the whole patimokkha memory. They chant the patimokkha by memory, and it's encouraged. Doesn't matter how old you are when you become a monk. Doesn't matter how long it'll take you. Memorize the patimokkha. It's like 13,000 words or lines. It's huge. It really is. I've chanted it like by reading it. And so there's this, and there are people, I think these are very special people with special memories, but there are people alive today who have all like 5,000 pages of the suttas memorized. I think the average person could not do this, but there are people who can do this today. So we have to keep in mind that no matter what the method that we're using, the purpose is preservation. The purpose is to keep the Dhamma alive as long as possible. That is the purpose behind all of this. And so then we come to the teachings starting to be written down. And traditionally, what we understand the teachings to be first written down in Sri Lanka, I think around 500 years after the Buddha's parinibbana, first written down on palm leaves. And this was because there was an era of strife where there was wars and famines and monks were dropping like flies. In an effort to preserve the teaching, they started writing it down. And from that beginning, we have the Buddhist world, we have the ancient teachings, especially those of you who know myself and know Empty Cloud, you've heard that we usually are focused on the early Buddhist texts, the suttas. Our Buddhist ancestors were so good at preserving the teachings that you can see the same teachings written down in thousands of miles apart, and they're 96% exactly the same. That is impressive thing to that. Now, exact thing for the most. That is an impressive link for thousands of years. That is an amazing thing. So this is the importance. The first importance is to have the mindset, the attitude of wanting to preserve the Dhamma. I first, when I first went to Bhavana Society, and I started to meet Sri Lankan people and Sri Lankan monks, both lay and monastics. One thing that I got from them over the years was this: they have built into their culture they have this ethos of preserving the Dhamma. They have been like the original preserver of the Dhamma for thousands of years. And that obviously allowed it to grow to Thailand and all across Asia. But this is an impressive mindset. But this is the mindset that you see in Thailand and different places that has kept the teachings alive. This is the mindset that we in the West, those of us who are like myself, a Western Buddhist monastic who's thinking about how we bring the Dhamma to the West and how we grow that as our preceptors are getting older and about to, pass away in the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years. How do we adapt the ancient teachings and keep them alive in a new place? And so this is something I think of a lot. And so this brings us up to like the Pāli. So maybe you come to a teaching and you hear lots and lots of Pāli. I remember when I first went to Bhavana Society and heard Bhante Silananda, Bhante Gunaratana talking, and before they said anything, they would say it in Pāli, and I just hear. I'm like, do I need to hear that whole thing? And then they would translate it in English. Now it took me a couple of years, but what I realized was English was like their fifth or sixth language. So when they wanted to say something in English, they first said it in Pāli, and then they were like translating it as they were saying it, and then they said it in English. And it is actually very important to teach the Dhamma in the local language. The Buddha literally says this in the suttas, that you should teach the Dhamma in the language that the people can understand. I mean, it's obvious, right? It's very obvious. How can they understand? How can they join the ranks that will preserve the Dhamma and practice the Dhamma, become very learned, very well practiced, if they don't understand what you're saying? So there is this very important understanding that you do need to teach in the local language. And this is why when the Dhamma comes to the West, it's very important that we not only teach in the local language, but also, the ability to understand much more than just the language. Somebody like Bhante Gunaratana, who's, he's 97 years old, he's been in America since the early 1960s, 1963 he came over. He has been in this culture so long that he actually is very masterful at being able to teach somebody in this culture. Almost as well as somebody like me who literally grew up in the culture. So being able to kind of connect with the people in that culture. I'm not going to go to, if I went to Sri Lanka, I wouldn't really know how to connect with them in their culture because I'm not from that culture. So it's important to kind of understand, how we want to share the Dhamma with people. And so when it comes to Pāli, one thing that I learned, it took me some years to understand this, but there is a lot of nuance and understanding lost in translation. You cannot use one English word for dukkha. You just can't. I remember reading Access to Insight, which is Ajahn Jeff's, Thanissaro Bhikkhu's website back in the day before Sufi existed and everything. And I remember reading about dukkha, a page. It's still there, actually. You can go there. And He says, there's not really one English word that fits dukkha, but here's a whole paragraph of words. And I was like, oh, okay. Like when I first read that, I was like, really? But now, obviously, as I understand Pali more since then and things I understand, yeah, that's actually really good. And when you read a specific translation, the person who translates it has to make a choice. And so they choose. So Pico Bodhi, I think, chooses suffering. Ajahn Jeff chooses stress. Sometimes you hear unsatisfactoriness. And those are all valid in specific contexts. But they don't really encompass the entirety of the word. So for myself personally, understanding the Pali words has had a great impact on my own practice, on my own development, on my own gaining of wisdom and insight. So for the average layperson, nobody expects a layperson who's busy with all kinds of various things is like, say, now, memorize, no, study Pali, become fluent in Pali. Right? So that's really the job of a specialist. That's what a monk is. A monk is a specialist. Now, let me explain what I mean by a specialist. Throughout most of history, most people were farmers because they were farming to keep themselves alive. Or they were hunter-gatherers. Actually, throughout most history, most people were hunter-gatherers. But throughout most of society, civilization history, most people are farmers. But as ability to grow crops increased, so less people needed to be farming, cities built up. And in those cities, there were specialists. You went to the blacksmith, or the cobbler, the person who made your shoes, or the farrier, the person who did the horse stuff, the fletcher, the person who made arrows. Right? People became specialists. And that has only increased to today. There's maybe back in the Buddha's day, there were hundreds of specialized professions. Now there's probably hundreds of thousands. There's so many specializations. And that's what a monastic is. A monastic is a specialist. We are, just like the blacksmith is supported, by the farmer and all the other people. If the blacksmith needs food, they go and trade with the farmer. Right? The Buddhist monastic is supported by the laity with food and clothing and shelter and medicines, so that they can be a specialist, not only in just their meditation and developing wisdom and insight, but also in things like learning Pali or Sanskrit in the Mahayana, understanding the teachings in a deeper way and preserving them. Like, this is why I feel the weight of all of my brothers for thousands of years, my monastic brothers. I'm part of the oldest living fraternity in the world, right? The way all of their bring the teaching to me. I, on the other side of the world, thousands of years later, could become a monastic, can learn the Dhamma. So much gratitude for the men and women for thousands of years who have kept this alive. Have to continue that. In that, I do feel a little, I feel a little, how shall I say, not guilty, but I feel like I should know Pali a bit better than I do. Today, 10 years ago, I became a Samanera. So I've had 10 years, and those have been very busy and challenging 10 years. And I, don't use it as an excuse, but in my mind, it's like, you should know Pāli better. By this point, you should, be fluent in all these kind of things. And that's because of I want to make sure that I preserve it, right? Hopefully in the future, when I have, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis that I've ordained, then they will also preserve it. Because I'm already pretty old. Who knows how much time I have left. But I want to at least pass on that feeling, that thought of, it has thousands of years of people have brought this to me, and I want to make sure that this keeps going for thousands of years more. So let me understand the Pāli, memorize it, do all these things so that I can then pass it on, and that they can pass it on to their disciples, and then they can share it with lay people 100 years from now, 200, 300, 500, 1,000, maybe even 10,000 years from now. Who knows? Buddhism will be in space somewhere. Who knows? But as long as there are good men and women of the Fourfold Assembly who are learning the Dhamma, practicing the Dhamma, keeping it along. This is lay people too, remember. Don't you have responsibility. Just don't say oh, the monks can do it. Right? The lay people, I haven't personally experienced this, but I've been told things like when Bhante Gunaratana came to America and he started shaking people's hands. Bhante, this is not how things. And that's a minor thing. Not that culturally it's an issue, but Vinaya rules is not that huge of an issue. Even the Sri Lankan lay people have the idea of we try to do our best to keep this alive. And of course that can lead to holding fast to traditions so much that you can't allow any kind of change, which is also not good. When you come to a country, a different culture, different things have to adapt. But also what I see in this country is people who will say, all of that old stuff is old and not worthy of the present and all that. We're going to just throw all that out and we're going to do everything new. Also not good. Not good at all. Because of modern viewpoints or whatever, we'll say, well, back then those people were like that and it was this way, and we don't like that because we're more enlightened now and we think things, we do. Not a good way to be. Right? There's a balance of bringing forth, keeping along with us all the wisdom and the wonderful things of the past, and as we need to. Right? Before there was Thai Buddhism, right? There were Buddhist people who went to Thailand, and over hundreds of years, it became Thai Buddhism, or became Burmese, became Vietnamese Buddhism, it became Mahayana, different things. So we have to understand that things do need to adapt, and some things do need to change. But we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater either. It's very important that we as Buddhist people have that mindset of, that metta mindset, that compassionate mindset of, we want to do our best to keep the teachings alive for the next generation. Right, one of my favorite quotes is, a wise man plants trees under which he knows he will never sit. right? And when I use that, like with Magaseka, the organization I want to create, it's like, I'm not going to see it for long. Hopefully it lasts beyond me. It might not. Sabbe Sankara Anicca. But if I at least plant the seeds, and hopefully somebody 100 years from now can learn, right? There's a place in Colorado or a place online or whatever, place on Mars, who knows where things would be, and they can learn the Dhamma. Right? And if that happens, well, I know I did my job of, I can rest easy knowing that I continued the chain. Preserve the Dhamma as to the best of my ability. Nobody can be perfect. Eventually the Dhamma will become more and more corrupt, and over time it will become forgotten. This is inevitable because everything is unstable, undependable, and impermanent. But at least we can try to keep it alive as long as possible so that we can make sure that future generations can practice the Dhamma as well and pass it on to future generations and future generations. This is the importance of preserving Pāli, because Pāli in the Theravada is the form, the container in which the teachings survive. We can always go, even no matter what translation. Well, I don't know what they mean there. I don't quite like their translation. It's a little off or whatever. We can go to the Pāli. And we can look. And we can look at the definition even. You can go to, like, any of you can go down, if you want to, you say, oh, what does dukkha mean? What does sankara mean? What is it? If you just type in Google digital Pāli reader or digital Pāli dictionary, and you just type it in. And then you see, oh, that's the translation Bhikkhu Bodhi chose, that's the translation Bhante Sujato chose, etc., etc., etc. You can see that. So, like I said in closing, for lay people, you're not expected to learn Pāli. There are some, I've met a number of young lay people, and I think they're more language inclined, who really get enthralled and excited in learning Pāli, and that's great. But you're never expected to learn Pāli as a layperson. But at the very least, if you are a full practitioner, if you're following the Full Noble Eightfold Path, and you are doing mental cultivation and all these things, and learn a little bit deeper about important Pāli words, like dukkha, like anicca. Right? To close, I'll give an example of my own life. Anicca. Everybody uses the term impermanence. That's such an overused word, though. Even New Age, it's all impermanent, man. Right? Everybody uses impermanence. It kind of loses. It loses its power. I remember years ago when I looked up anicca in the dictionary, and yeah, impermanence was there. But also was there something I hear almost nobody ever use the definitions for anicca. Undependable and unstable. And when I read that, I had this vision arise, this insight of, this is what the Buddha means. When he says sabbe sankhara anicca, everything you will ever experience is unstable and undependable. Your relationships, your job, your career, your life, your health is unstable. It's undependable. One second it's this, the next second it's that. And I had the vision of myself like at sea, and I was grabbing at floating pieces of wood to try to push myself up. And every time I did, I was depending on this piece of wood to keep myself above the water. It broke, and I fell back into the water. And I kept trying to push myself up until I realized, sabbe sankhara anicca. There's nothing, there's no refuge. The Buddha says the only security, the only safety is nibbana. So as long as we're alive, everything we will ever experience is unstable and undependable. And that just comes from understanding the Pāli word a little bit deeper. That's all it was. I literally just went on the dictionary. Right? So for lay people, this is what I would suggest. Get to know the very important Pāli words a little deeper. Bhante Analayo has a wonderful book series. I think it's called, if you Google Bhante Analayo Thought Worlds, it'll come up. It's like Thought Worlds of the early Buddhist texts or something to that effect. And all it is 2 books of, do you want to know about Sankara? Well, here's about 8 or 9 pages of Bhante Analayo breaking down all the contextual understanding. Right? This was also very important for me as a layperson. I really enjoyed when I found those books. Oh, and that's your end of the bargain as lay people, and obviously also to as part of doing keeping everything alive is supporting the monastics and being specialists in keeping the Pāli alive, right? Training the next generation of monastics in Pāli so that they know it very well. And so that they, can understand the Dhamma even more deeply, and so that we can keep things alive. Now, thankfully, the Dhamma has reached in the digital age. Even many secular scholars, people who are not Buddhists, but they like all kinds of different languages, and so they study the Pāli very deeply. And so there's all kinds of documented things. So thankfully, we've reached an age where if a person dies, then not all is lost. However, if everything goes too digital, there's like a solar flare that knocks out all the whatever electricity on the planet. Everything that's stored on a computer is gone, but left physically is there. Right? So the more we keep the teachings in various different containers, the more they will be able to stay. So, all right. I think that's good talk. We have a little bit of time left if anybody has questions or anything you'd like to discuss. Any questions?
I'm favorite Pāli learning resources.
Favorite Pāli learning. How I started.